So thank you, Sterling. I always thank you for organising it and being such a force in Sydney. Yeah. And making sure that these things happen. So obviously it's a team and Kayla put it together, but you're always the driving force. So I have to always thank you for that and always for your kind words. And of course everybody coming out in this cold weather. It's not always so easy, but Ilana, it's very humbling actually sitting here in Sydney, as much as we worry and think and doom scroll and pray, and it's just very humbling when someone like you is on the ground and is really embodying a little bit, much more than what I'm going to say tonight, about what it is to live in difficult times and to be resilient and to take action and to keep living and moving forward, and not letting, you use the word trauma quite often, not letting that stop you from living a fulfilling life. And it's very, very inspirational, because it's literally like the soldiers, it's on the ground doing what needs to be done in incredible ways. And hearing about what you do, I'm always more than fascinated, awed, the incredible people in the world and what they do. It's always good to be reminded of what people do and their strength, and each of us has our unique contribution. So thank you for that inspiration. I'm talking about resilience tonight. How do we face the future with resilience? It's not easy. Everybody is going through really, really difficult times, not only in our personal lives. I'm finding that people really are not having easy times. It feels more difficult, but also what's going on for Jews in the world, and it's not easy to face the future. So I looked into some of the research on resilience, and I'm very passionate about looking at the body of work that supports the capacity to be resilient, rather than the body of work that keeps saying things like, we will never recover. So even today, I was with somebody and they mentioned something and they went, she will never be the same. And that kind of language is not helpful. That doesn't mean we're not traumatized now, doesn't mean horrific, and I'm using catastrophic language because these are real examples. Horrific things are happening. But when we keep saying we will never recover, that's not a Jewish idea. We have recovered, we have bounced back. Doesn't mean there isn't individual pain along the way, but as a Jewish nation, we know what resilience is. So George Banana has done a lot of work on resilience, and one of the things he did is he looked at what all the different psychologists and experts were saying, and it's quite funny actually in a way, because everyone's got their own, every expert's got their own idea. This one's saying practice gratitude, and this one's saying do exercise. He actually lists, I think, 101 things. But what he really looked at underpinning that is, he says the key to resilience is what he calls the flexibility sequence. And the flexibility sequence involves, so he gives an example. He gives an example of a man who was beaten up very badly in a park. This is a simple example. He's done work with volcanoes erupting and avalanches and 9/11, but this is an easier way I found it meaningful for me. So this man was very badly beaten up in a park near where he lived, really, really badly. He crawled back home. He locked himself up for 3 or 4 days, and everything felt absolutely bleak. And then the beginning of the flexibility sequence is he started actually going, okay, what actually happened? Starting to assess what happened and how could I start thinking about it. And so, of course, that beginning time can take longer or shorter. So that's the first part of it, is what actually happened. Then the second part of the flexibility sequence is, what can I do about it? What should I be doing? Do I have the means to do it? So it might be what I want to do is go and kill them or find them. But in reality, that's not what I'm going to be able to do. But what I may be able to do is go to the police. So you work out, what can I do? And then the third step of it is checking in and going, is it working? So what they're talking about is, there isn't one fix. It's about assessing what needs to be done, working out whether you have that, not to set unrealistic expectations, and then checking in, testing and measuring, is it working? If not. And this is why you might be doing something different to somebody else, because we all will be trying different things at different times, and different things will work at different times. So this is the underlying thing. It's not one tool, it's not one guru, it's this flexibility sequence. But then he says an interesting thing. He says, before you can do that, or underlying it, you need another 3 things. And those 3 things are optimism. The second thing is believing there's a future. And the third thing is seeing the threat as a challenge. So I'm sure you can already start hearing from a Jewish point of view, these are all things we can relate to. So the first thing is, what is optimism? What does it mean to be optimistic? And believe it or not, there's a science around optimism. There's a very famous book by Martin Seligman called Learn to Optimism. You can learn to be optimistic. So although it's a word we use often, it actually is a term that they've worked out what optimism is. And he talks about 3 main, he calls it the 3 Ps, 3 main things that optimistic people do compared to pessimistic people. So I always think it sounds like a joke, the optimist and the pessimist, but he really talks about the optimist and the pessimist. So he gives an example. Let's say that an optimist and a pessimist both invest in the share market and at the same amount of money. They're both in a similar situation, and the next day a war breaks out and they lose a lot of money. The pessimist will go, I'm a total failure. Everything I do just doesn't work out. We call that pervasive pessimistic thinking. The optimist says, you know what, maybe I'm not so good at investing money in the share market, but there's so much more to my life. I'm a good mother, I'm a good sister, I'm a good friend, I'm good at my job. You can list a million things. So this area I'm not good at, and I admit to that, but actually it's not the whole of me. I'm not a total failure. I'm not totally useless. So that's the first P, pervasive pessimistic thinking. The second P is permanence. The pessimist says it's always going to be like this. I'm never going to make money. I'm never going to be a success. And the optimist goes, it's a bad year. Next year the markets will change. I can change. Things will be different. It's temporary. It's not permanent. And the third P is personal. The pessimist goes, this only happens to me. I'm the only person who loses money, or God is picking on me. It's just me. And the optimist goes, no, everybody who invested yesterday lost money on the stock market. It's not personal. So those are called the 3 Ps, and that's the underpinning of optimism. Now, if you think about it from a Jewish point of view, all of those 3 things we talk about in Torah Hashkofa. And when we talk about, well, I'm going to go through all of these 3 things. I'm going to go through these concepts and come back to it, but you'll see how Torah thought really gives answers to all these things, or gives a way of looking at it that helps us to be optimistic. So when he talks about being optimistic, he doesn't give these solutions, because unless you practice those 3 Ps. But the Torah is full of solutions, which I'm going to share with you now, that help us to think right, that help us to be the optimistic, resilient people we need to be. So what I'm going to talk about now is based on a talk that was given by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs a long time ago, on the 1st of September 1991, when he was inaugurated as the chief rabbi. And in this talk, he speaks about Akavia ben Mahalalel, who says, it's a famous thing in Pirkei Avos, this was actually said in terms of when you sin or before you sin, reflect on 3 things and you will not transgress. You will not lose your way. Know from where you came, know where you're going, and know before whom you will give an accounting. And what they're saying is that what he was saying is if you realize, so I've read different ways of putting it. He says, no, where did you come from? He says, a putrid drop. You're a nobody, you come from a drop. And where are you going? You're going to the next world. And before whom will you be accountable? Before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What Rabbi Sachs says is, let's think about that as Jewish people as a whole. He says, we can go astray because of a failure of imagination. It's an interesting thing, because lately I've been hearing this word a lot from people that I listen to, like even Rabbi Yossi Jacobson in a shir a few months ago, when he was talking about the Kohen Gadol and the ephod and the front and the back. He was talking about being creative and being imaginative. Hello. So basically he's saying, in order to move forward, we need to use our imagination. Now, our imaginations are very, very powerful. If we don't have a dream, if we don't have a vision, we cannot be resilient. And he says it so beautifully that I'm actually going to read it, because he says, the way he writes, he says, we will not move forward if we have a failure of historical imagination, when we forget from where we came from. A failure of prophetic imagination, where we are forgetting where we are going to. And a failure of spiritual imagination, that we forget before whom we stand. So we can apply this to us today. And he says, Jewish history has always been about a journey. If you read the Torah, it starts with Lech Lecha, the journey. And the first thing Hashem says to Abraham is go. Go where? To a land, to nationhood, towards being blessed and becoming a blessing towards others. And he says that the whole story of the Torah, from Bereshit to Devarim, is a story of a journey. But here is the mystery that haunts Jewish history. We've never arrived. We still haven't arrived. The end of Devarim, Moshe looks out, but he still hasn't crossed the Jordan. Where have the children of Israel come from, and where are they going? We know they've come from a small family to a great nation, but what happened? When are we going to arrive? He says, only 3 times have we stood on the brink of our destination. What is the destination? To be a great nation with freedom and a land. The first time was in the days of Joshua. The second time when Cyrus gave the Babylonian exiles a chance to return. And this is what he said in 91, and if I can be bold enough to say, I think this is what we need to think about now. The third time is now. What happened in those moments? He said they fell apart, and he goes into the history. I'm not a historian and I'm not going to talk about it, but he validates the idea that those 2 times it fell apart. So we have traveled for generations. Do we now have the courage to arrive? We learn to live with Israel as a dream. Can we live with it as a reality? And he says we must work together to renew the Jewish world. And it's so beautifully put. As I say, he was talking about us becoming a chief rabbi, but I think every one of us can build a Jewish world. We need to remember, where did we come from? We come from generations of Jews who suffered because of their faith. And where are we going? We're going to the date where we can live our faith in freedom and pride. And to whom are we responsible? To Hashem, to the Jews who came before us, and to the generations yet unborn. We are on the cusp of history, and we are needed, as Rabbi Manis Friedman keeps it, we are needed and we're on the cusp. I think we're also responsible to the other nations when they look to us in this way. So the idea is, how do we do this? So the first thing is to be aware of this, to be aware that we're in this present moment and we should not waste it. When Rabbi Garari talks about mindfulness, one of the things I love about his mindfulness is he talks about, when a lot of people practice mindfulness, they just think about being in the moment and focusing on their breath, and it's beautiful. But when you hear Rabbi Garari's, which was a few years ago, and I'm sure he still does this, he says, if you understand from a Jewish point of view that every moment is a new moment, Hashem is recreating the world, then when you focus on your breath, and the word for breath is the same as the word for neshama, and you realize that you can change in that minute. It's not just focusing on the breath that's very nice. It's like, I have the potential to change myself or to change this world in the moment. If we are mindful of that potential, every moment we have an opportunity to do something creative, innovative, helpful, constructive, important. Every single moment. And even if the last moment wasn't good, this moment we can change, because Hashem recreates every moment, recreates the world, and we can recreate ourselves. We should not think, well, I've never done it, or I can't. No, we have the potential every single moment to change. So when we're mindful in the present, to be aware of, how do I want to use this moment maximally? What should I be doing on this cusp that will make a difference to me, to my family, to the Jews? Every single moment is important. What legacy do we want to leave? I didn't actually see this, but I heard that some actress in Everyone Loves Raymond, I heard that woman, I don't know what her name is, and I heard this from someone, so I haven't got it right. But apparently what she said...
If you watched it.
Sorry?
It's also on Netflix.
Yeah, no, but I don't know her name. That's all I'm saying is I don't know her name. Now, I've watched Everyone Loves Raymond, I just don't know her name. His wife, apparently it was his wife who said it as an actress, but I didn't personally hear it, so... But she's not Jewish, and the person who told me said apparently recently, yeah. Now, why it was interesting, what she said and why it stuck with me and what I heard was said is, when she went to a Holocaust museum as a non-Jew, you think about what would I have done if the Holocaust was happening in my day? It's an interesting question. Everyone goes, oh, people knew, they didn't know. That's what she apparently said. What we need to think about, it's happening now. We are again needing to ask the question. But that applies to us as Jews as well. What would we have done? What legacy do we want to leave? We can choose every moment the legacy we want to leave to the future. Because we are now in a crisis. We are now in a situation where there are all these opportunities. And I'm not saying any of this with judgment. We can run away. We can avoid. I must say that we went on a cruise to New Zealand in December, and it was very soon after the war. And I'd often been a little bit fascinated growing up in South Africa, where everyone is very proudly Jewish in our little Kalaga over there. But I suddenly realized we were in this remote part on the South Island, and I thought, I can understand how Holocaust survivors got on boats and said, take me to the furthest part. I want to go to the tip of New Zealand. I'm going to change my name. I can't manage this anymore. So I'm not saying, what do we want to do? Do we want to be the person who wants to just go to the tip of the South Island? It's very cold. I wouldn't go there, but somewhere near, very isolated and actually not be Jewish. What do I want to do? Or do I want to be involved? And in what way do I want to involve? But we are leaving a legacy for our children and our grandchildren. These are questions that we need to ask. The other thing that I found quite ironic is, having become from in the 70s, and when the Rebbe spoke about Mashiach, I didn't become from, everybody knows, not in Chabad, so I knew a lot of non-Chabad people. And when Rebbe spoke about Mashiach and people were singing Mashiach, the non-Lubavitchers thought it was terrible. And people used to say, it's a Lubavitch thing, we don't do that. Now everyone talks Mashiach. And, I'm sure you also that viral clip, I think it was in America at Columbia, where there was the yellow flag on the news, and they're going, we haven't seen that flag, right? The Palestinian. But then, we're talking about in the mid-70s, it was passionate, like only the Chabadniks were talking about Mashiach. People did not talk. I used to find the Litvish at the end of a shiur, they would say, and may it happen speedily in our days. That was like a standard thing. But no one walked around going, Mashiach, Mashiach. And I remember the Hannahs had in Bellevue Hill, they had a massive sign as well that said, do acts of goodness and kindness. It was like seen as lunacy, like over the top. Mashiach now is much easier to talk about. But basically, we need to learn about Mashiach and we need to bring it into what we need to do. We always talk about the parsha being relevant, and I was listening to Rabbi Mendel Kaplan, and this is now so obvious, and obviously since I've read it, but in this week's parsha, today's parsha, in the middle of the parsha is a very famous pasuk, and he was saying he actually believes it's a pasuk that everybody can sing to. We sing it when we take the Torah out of the ark, Vayehi b'nesor Aaron. And why he said everyone knows it, he was saying even the most secular Jews, if they go to a bar mitzvah, they find out what time the laning is, and they come as they're taking the Torah out the ark, and they all sing, over here, right? And then they leave straight afterwards. So he said he believes it's the thing that everybody knows the most, that song. But it's actually in this week's parsha, between two nuns, but what I didn't know is that what it actually means and how relevant, and this is what he was talking about in his current share. So it says, that in the Torah there were 42 journeys, and there were many that they stayed at a place for a long time, but when they got up to move, this is what they said, and this is what Vayehi b'nesor. So when the ark traveled, Moshe said, rise up, Hashem, and sweep away your enemies and make your haters flee. It's actually in there that when, and this is what gives us a cause for optimism, we've always been pursued. As we left Egypt as slaves, we were being pursued. One would think you'd have, victims, poor slaves, be nice to them from the minute. We've always been pursued. But Hashem was in the ark, was actually there to protect us. So when he said, rise up and sweep away your enemies, Hashem is always there to protect us. And we need to know that, and we have had so many miracles that prove that Hashem is there, incredible miracles. And the other thing that I learned from Rabbi Sachs is he talks about the war when Gideon was fighting the war. And when Gideon was about to fight a war, and again, I don't know all the history, but the part I remember was that I think there were 20,000 people, and Hashem said that's too many people to fight the war. And then he got them to do something, and then they were down to 3,000, and he said, no, that's too many, and he gave them a test. They had to drink water, and when they were down to 300 soldiers, he said, no, that's enough. And they were fighting big armies, and the point of what Hashem was saying is, if we have a huge army, if we're big, it will look like it's your might, but if we have a small army, then we will see it's Hashem. And I took a lot of comfort from that, because we always say Israel is the small against the many, and all the Arab nations. But actually, if you read the story of Gideon, Hashem says, no, you've got to be small. Then my greatness comes out, that you realize it's not from your strength that it's happening. So every time we open the Torah, well, certainly I'm going to take it on board to realize it's not just a nice little song, but we actually each time are saying to Hashem, sweep away our enemies and make our haters flee. I'm just going to throw this in because this is what Rabbi Mendel Kaplan was talking about. He was talking about the two different words, enemies and hate. It's not really related to the share, but I got a lot out of it, so I'm just throwing it in here. I've got the mic, so I can just keep talking. He said, what's the difference between enemies and haters? And he said, enemies, you can have two people, let's say, who are political rivals, and they really don't get on. But if one of them dies, the other one will go to the funeral.
Say nice things about them.
Or say nice things about them, or care about the family. They don't like their politics, but... And I remember years ago, I saw a movie, I don't know what it was called, but it was about the Germans fighting the British. And on Christmas Day, they put down it was a very famous, apparently based on a true story, they put down their arms, and for 24 hours they celebrated together. And then they went back. Did any of you see it? And then they fought again. It was based on a true story. So... those are enemies. Now you're my enemy, we fight, but at the end of the day we can make friends or celebrate, or I'll feel for you because, like Kaplan says, because we're humans. Haters, he says, are what we're seeing now, inhuman. They are rejoicing at our pain and our death. And he says most of what Rashi talks about is not the first part about sweep away your enemies, because we can fight our enemies. It's the haters that we don't know what to deal with, because it's beyond us that people can stand and go, never in my life have I been more joyous than all these people have died. It's not human. And he says, so most of what Rashi talks about when the Torah came out is that Hashem, we need you, because really, and there's a word in it, that they hate you, Hashem. They're fighting us because they hate you. And then the rest of it, and this is also what must give us optimism and enormous pride, is they hate us, or really they hate Hashem, because we have a part of Hashem in us. We have a godly soul, and it's a fact. You can be the worst Jew in the world, you can follow every religion, but then if you decide one day to come to shul, you'll get an aliyah. If your mother Jewish, you get an aliyah. You want to marry a Jewish girl, no question. You can be eating the worst things, doing the worst things. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew, and you can never get rid of it. It's just a fact of being. It's the only religion. He says that it is just who we are. And the other nations know it. They don't care how frum you are, what you're eating. They know a Jew because they can see. They can see the godliness. And when evil, because there's evil in the world, picks up the goodness or the godliness, it fights against us. So back to the bigger picture. Know where you're coming from and where you're going. We're on a mission to bring Torah into the world, and we're on the mission to bring Mashiach. And we need to participate in it in the way that suits us, in a flexible way that's going to work for our individual personalities. Don't feel bad. Not everyone can look after 900 students at Boys Town. I couldn't. Those are your strengths. We all have different strengths, and it's so easy to feel inadequate and go, oh, I could never do that. You know, it's so easy to look at the person who became the doctor. We have to look at what we can do, because we have our unique contribution. So every time we learn Torah or hear a pasuk like Vayehi ben Esau, whatever, that's what gives us hope, because this has been going on and Hashem is still there and He's still with us. So when you have like the Iran missiles, and that's a miracle. There are lots of miracles that are happening all the time that remind us that Hashem is actually there, and we shouldn't be afraid that we're smaller than the rest. So what else does he talk about? He says, let's be proud and free. And this is what I'm finding amazing. People are walking around with big Magen Davids, and people are proud. I mean, I work with a lot of people who would say they're very secular, but they are so proudly Jewish. They really are, and we need to be proud of being Jewish and to respond with pride to what people are saying to us. But the big thing that Rabbi Sachs talks about, and this is something we always hear, but we must remind each other, is Ahavas Yisrael. We need to bring Hashem into our lives by practicing Ahavas Yisrael. We need to go above and beyond in caring about other people. We need to stop the divisions. We need to stop the hate, although we don't really hate in that way, but we need to stop being enemies of people. We need to find a way, and Hasidus teaches us, to really respond from neshama to neshama. Just because someone wears a different yarmulke or eats a different food, we really have to, and it starts in this community. We can start in our way by really caring for everybody else in the community. Stop talking Lashon Hara. Stop running other people down. We create havoc when we do that. If we start in our community, we are making a difference. Ahavas Yisrael brings Hashem into your midst. When there is controversy, Hashem removes Himself. I'll share one of my favorite stories. It's a story about two brothers, and they lived in a shtetl, and they decided to move to a bigger town to make money. And they go, and in those days you couldn't travel very far. It took a long time to get there, but after a few years their father decides to go and visit them. So he gets in a wagon and he travels for a few days, and when he comes to the outskirts of the town, he asks, how am I, he asks the guy, do you know Moshe and do you know Yaakov? And the guy says, yes, Yaakov. He's such a balabos. He's a multi-millionaire. He's the big macher of the town. He lives in the mansion over there. Moshe, he's a bit of a schlepper. He sort of lives on the side. He doesn't really have running water. He's a Rahmanis. So the father goes to Moshe's house. And he's spending time with Moshe. And Yaakov, being the macher that he is and knows what's going on, he hears these fathers at Moshe. So he gets in his carriage, and he has these horses, he comes to the house, and he bangs on the door, and his father opens the door. And he says, Dad, why didn't you tell me you're here? The father looks, and he says, do I know you? He says, yes, I'm your son. He says, sorry, don't know you. He says, I am your son. Don't you remember me? I'm Yaakov. He said, no, don't know who you are. So then he spies Moshe in the back, and he says, Moshe, tell him I'm your brother. So the father says, when you treat him like a brother, I can treat you like a father. And that says it beautifully. We have to treat each other like brothers and sisters. We have to love each other. That is enormous, and we can all do that, whatever our other capabilities are. I was thinking of something else. I've always believed in supporting local business, and I think that I wanted to just throw that in here. Think about where you're spending your money. Some people are having it hard, but either way, think about it. There's all this stuff going on. Does it really make a difference if you pay an extra $20 somewhere, but you're keeping a Jew in business? We've got to be there for each other. There are lots of ways we can show Ahavas Yisrael. We need to revive or work on Ahavas Hashem. We need to spend time to be passionate about our Torah. Rabbi Manis Friedman talks a lot about this. He says we've tried communism, we've tried socialism, we've tried education, we've seen the best universities. At the end of the day, we are needed by Hashem to tell people the only solution is Torah. For non-Jews, the 7 Noahide laws, and for us. We need to educate ourselves so that when people talk to us, we don't have to get into political debates, but we need to know there's a solution, and we need to renew our faith in Hashem. We need to have some education. We need to be passionate. Even if you don't know much, when you're passionate that this is what it's all about, that Hashem is true, that we are connected to the land of Israel, that will carry across to other people. We had I don't know if any of you have seen it, there's a Meshulach that comes out. He used to live in Sfas, he told me now he was in Kiryat Malaki, I can't remember his name. But he visited us this week. What's his name? Yeah, I think so. No. He's an ex-Sydney guy. No. Anyway, he came to us on Thursday night, and I think he developed the yellow flag. But what he's done now, and maybe I'll circulate it, he's made patches that says Mashiach. It's very green. It's the color of the army uniform, and it sticks to the army uniform.
Sorry, I've seen other patches. They're not bad.
But what's interesting is he showed us a video. He says they've given out 100,000 patches. But what's interesting is he has videos of these boys running, secular not, running to get the patch. It's the most fascinating thing. They want the patch. Just like we went through the thing, it's just a beautiful thing that people are really connected. And so when we can be inspiring to other people, because we all have a Pintel Yid, everyone will be inspired. The other big thing is we need to become leaders, but like the Rebbe, we need to create other leaders. We need to make opportunities for other people to thrive. We need to have an abundance philosophy, and we need to create leaders for the future, because remember, we are thinking not only where we came from, but where we're going. So think about ways that you can promote leadership from your family. If you're a leader in your family, but you create space for other people to be leaders as well. One of the things that it's going to probably sound difficult, but we live in a world where children are so overprotected. And there's a lot of stuff that's come out now, like the book The Anxious Generation, or the other book Bad Therapy that I've just but recently read both. They talk about how kids are so overprotected in the real world and completely underprotected in the virtual world. But I'll talk about the real world. That if we want to have future leaders, we have to give our kids a bit more rein, because we are creating anxious children by not giving them responsibility. And again, you can read the literature. It's not my personal opinion. There's a lot of ways that people are overemphasizing feelings, not letting the kids do anything on their own, not letting their kids play in regular playgrounds. Everything's a fear. Never mind, don't you live in Israel. You can live in Sydney at Waverley Park, and there's petrified that anything's going to happen. This is not good. We have to manage our own anxiety, and we've got to give our kids potential. There's a lovely book called The Blessing on the Scraped Knee, and that's what Schneier also talks about in Bad Therapy. It's okay if your kids fall and scrape their knee. Let them learn to stand up. That's resilience. We need to work on our own resilience, our own anxiety, and our own calmness, so that we can bring up new leaders in the next generation, because all the statistics are that we are literally impacting the mental health of our children by being so overprotective. So I've spoken about optimism. The second part of optimism, the second part of the three things that need to come before flexibility, is confidence that you can do it. And it's a very simple thing, that we know that Hashem does not give you something that you can't cope with. You sometimes feel you can't, but if you open yourself up to that, I've heard it from many, many people. When you go, I can cope with this, Hashem has tailor-made this for me, whether it's on a big scale or whether it's on a small scale, I can do this. It helps you believe that you can do it. There are other times when it's smaller things, not a war, when you look at times that you have coped with other things, but this is something that most of us haven't gone through a war. I know you were talking about as if you're so old, but we haven't lived through this kind of a war. But really Hashem is putting, and He's with us. It's like the ark is just there, and He's going to be there with us. And then the third thing is to see the threat as a challenge. We believe that everything Hashem sends us is there for us to grow. It's a challenge. There's so many different moshels. The one is, to get olive oil, you've got to squeeze the olive. It's there as a challenge to build our muscles. It's there to make us stronger. And we need to know that. And we need to know that as Jews, we have always been resilient. And the truth is, we've always come out stronger. I listened, in the video, they were talking about the Startup Nation quite a few times. And I read it a long time ago, so I might have some of the details wrong. But one of the things when I read that was how so many of the things that are amazing now came out of adversity. So one of the things, and again, my facts might not be exactly right, but one of the things that I seem to remember in the 70s is that the world turned a lot against Israel about the Yom Kippur War and Israelis went to China, and that's why quite a few Israelis apparently can talk Mandarin, and they were able to produce microchips, and this is all the detail I can't remember specifically, and send them via China to the rest of the world because no one else would take them directly from Israel. The Israelis were always finding a way around the adversity. They didn't just suddenly become a startup nation. There was always a way that you find around. In the book The Outliers, he gives a similar example. He talks about in the Great Depression in America, Jewish lawyers could not get work. The non-Jewish lawyers, the very serious sort of, non-Jewish big firms did not want these Jews in their firm. So what did the Jews do? They went and they opened a little firm called Goldman Sachs or one of these. And the only thing that they could do was acquisitions and mergers, because it wasn't what the non-Jews, it wasn't Pashnet, it wasn't big enough. So they started acquisitions and mergers. Well, as the Depression went along, that became the most needed thing, acquisitions and mergers, because people were going bankrupt and whatever. And so those little Jewish companies just blossomed out of adversity. And that's where the flexibility. We have to be adaptable. So or the word we used in COVID, pivot, right? They don't want us here, we'll find a way there. But we will come out stronger, because even if we look at our history since the start of the land of Israel, we have come out stronger each time. We have. I'm not saying it without feeling that there's not terrible loss and suffering. But on a bigger scale, we have come out stronger. And individually, we can do it again. So look at where we've come from. We have a history from Abraham, who started the journey, didn't have an easy life. He started and he made the journey. We have those genes from our forefathers and our foremothers. And we have recent generations that can be role models for us. We should not forget the vision. We're part of moving a much bigger picture. It's not our individual lives. As Jews, we're one community and we're part of history. And remember to whom we are responsible. We need to answer to Hashem in the sense that He tells us these are good ways to behave, these are the mitzvahs to keep, but also to the generations that came before, the generations that are going to come. And as I said, even the non-Jews, the more we walk with pride, the more we are representatives of Hashem, we will be fulfilling our purpose. Well, thank you very much.